Welcome to DMs Discuss. Welcome to DMs Discuss, where today DMs are going to discuss starting your adventure. We're going to talk today about finding players, like just getting started, and session zero and what that is and what those entail.
So let's go into the first topic, I guess, finding players. Let's kind of start. I'm gonna give a 1 to 10 of how hard I think it is to find players as a DM. So I'm gonna say with 10 being the easiest. I think right now, like with the prevalence of all these shows like Crit Role and how pop culture D&D has become, I'm gonna say it's like an 8 or 9. There's Discord groups dedicated to tabletop gaming. There's a lot of people who want to take that step into D&D, but DMing is too daunting. So a lot of times in these groups, you'll find just players looking for a DM.
Oh, I would 100% agree. Now it's used never, and I'd say more. It's not so much finding players; it's then like filtering players into the kind of people who want to play in the kind of game you want to run, the players you want to be around with, because it's different skill levels, different expectations, different types, ways to play D&D. So I think that's more of it. It's not so much finding people who want to play; is finding the right fit.
Yeah, for sure. I think finding people who want to play, like you're definitely going to be able to find that, right, Mike?
Yeah, finding people that want to play isn't a problem. I think it's just finding, like Chris said, the mix of experience levels and skill levels and people that want to play the same kind of game, right? Like there's people that are really combat heavy, people that are like actually into the RP side of things, which is fun, but I think a little more rare amongst less experienced players.
Yeah, I'd say in general, in my experience, anyways, I think a lot of players do approach D&D with that kind of combat aspect. A lot of people are really into like the combat in D&D and fighting these monsters and getting loot. And then there's this whole other aspect of D&D which is like the RP and character progression building. And until you actually start playing, I don't think you realize how fun that part can be. Like don't get me wrong, I love combat, but like even the RP side of things, I quite enjoy.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with you. I think it's also, a lot of people, they see the RP, but they think, especially being exposed to it from like common sources, they see people who kind of like professionally do that, do it at such another level, but they can understand the rules. And a lot of people really develop the RP over time, especially like people who are new to the game will kind of like expect a little bit more combat, so they're kind of told what to do as opposed to like letting the more freeform role playing adventure kind of play out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that was coolest about running like new player sessions and whatnot at Toronto D&D was seeing D&D kind of use as a social tool as well, though, because a lot of people that came into the bar and sat down and didn't talk to anybody, wouldn't say anything until the game started, and then when they were in character, they were like super able to talk to people at the table and whatnot. So I think you'll get a mix of that. People that like don't know how to RP or don't want to RP yet or haven't experienced it, and then people who will basically only interact as their character when they're at the table, which is also another fun.
Yeah. And I think that like that's not so much experience level too, because I think I see this in new players and like returning players or experienced players. Some people are happy to just sit and listen throughout the whole session, and chime in, on occasion here and there. I find like Chris strikes me as one of these players in our Wednesday campaign where Chris will like be content to sit there and just listen quite a bit and kind of chime in here and there where they feel their character
With a
has
good old bon mot.
yeah, or a nice, a well placed pun. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think like that whole like I think there's when we talk about mix of players, we're talking about two things. We're talking about experience in terms of do they know the rules and how familiar are they with that sort of deal and spells, etc. And then the other side of that is like players who prefer like a RP heavy campaign versus a combat focused campaign.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So I mean, let's talk about the the new versus experienced players first. So I'm a DM and I'm new and I'm starting out, right? Do I want to grab 5 new players or 4 new players? What are the pros and cons of that? And uh,
Yeah, I think playing with new players can be fun as a new DM because you don't get called out on your bullshit quite so often.
That's true. They don't know the rules, and neither do you.
Exactly. I think one of the things as a DM is that you have to know that you don't need to know every rule in the book. Like one of the great examples is Matt Mercer during the finale of Crit Role Season 2 actually pulled out the PHB to look through and find the grapple rules because he wasn't quite sure, and it was a kind of pivotal moment. He wanted to make sure he got it right. You don't need to know every rule to run a campaign. You like just be okay referencing the source book. Maybe people wait a couple of minutes if you
Yeah.
want that. And then also like it's your world. You created it, right? Like even if you're running a pre-written, you're running it. DMs are essentially the deity of whatever you're running. So
Yeah. So even though I agree with that a little bit, I think as a new DM, you do kind of want to look through like the Dungeon Master's Guide, and look at some of these, listen to some of these podcasts, and look for examples of DMing, and you will kind of establish your own style. I think sometimes as a player, when you're playing in one of these games, you do expect your DM to kind of be consistent in their rulings, right? So I think having a grip on what a check looks like, and like for example, you don't need to know a specific grapple rule, but knowing that someone can grapple. If one of your players says, "Oh, I want to try and grab something," you can say, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna just quickly look through the book for that."
the point is like you don't need to know everything to run a game.
No,
So
for
you
sure.
don't need to be intimidated by the like expansive rule set.
I think before I ran the game, a little bit of my experience was playing in Chris's campaign, and I did have the DMG and I did skim through it, but like you're not reading that thing front to back and you're not memorizing every rule. So I think some people do think of it that way, and it's completely not.
Oh, absolutely. That's the thing too. Is I feel like it's always good to have kind of like if you're a new DM, kind of having a mix of like new and like experienced players is always good. Because sometimes, like especially if like you know them, like when the like you DM for us that one time, it's kind of helpful to have other DMs who kind of like know it's your first time. They can help you with the rules, and also there's no pressure because like it's not like they're looking at you like wow, like it's a DM. They're like, hey, this is your first time. It's all right. We've all been there before. And so sometimes it's helpful to have like kind of that person on board, similar to how Toronto D&D used to offer like the shadow DMing thing, where you could come to their event and have another DM with you to kind of give you like a bit of a helping hand, help guide stuff if you weren't entirely sure. So I mean, it's up to you. And like everyone has their own different comfort levels and stuff like that. So I think you kind of find it, which is why I recommend doing maybe some one shots before really getting into like a full campaign and stuff.
For sure, yeah, I feel the same way. I think my first time DMing for like a non-group of like my high school buddies was DMing for a group of the Black Strike Vanguard, and I believe that Mike and Chris, you guys played in that game.
Yeah.
Oh
Indeed.
no, Chris, I think you were working and you kind of like watched and things like that.
No, wasn't the Fey and Nay one?
Uh, I don't know if it was the Fae and Nay one. I think this one was when they fought Aegis. They fought Aegis and his wolf.
Yeah, and his
It
wolf.
was
Yeah,
kind of,
yeah.
Oh yes, okay, I remember that
yeah, it
one.
was a
Yeah,
little
I wasn't playing
training
it.
mission for some new like Black Strike recruits. And I think there I had a mix of players. So Mike was there. I had a mix of players who were new, um, and some who were like experienced DMs. And I found it helpful. I didn't find it daunting. And like there were certain parts where, like, if you do have an experienced player in your group, feel free to ask a question. Like you're not, no one expects you to know everything. So I mean, during that session, I might have asked Mike like, "Oh, what kind of check would you think this would be?" And
Yeah,
Mike might say,
absolutely.
"Oh, it's a nature check probably."
Yeah.
So I think having an experienced player can help in that regard too.
Yeah, I think
Also, I've always found that any DM will always help people learn how to DM, just because it means there's a higher chance they might actually play in a game.
yeah, I might actually get to play the game. That's perfect.
Yeah, that's totally cool. If you are taking up the DM mantle, yeah, it's a very heavy mantle, and you'll be carrying it around for a while. Once in a while, you have a player who'll be like, "Oh, let me carry that for a bit. You look tired," but yeah. Do
I
you
can just hold it for you.
So, Mike, do you prefer a table full of new players? Do you prefer a mixed table, or do you prefer a table full of experienced players?
I think it depends on what I'm running. Like if I'm running one shots, I actually really enjoyed like my favorite nights with Toronto D&D was always new player night, where you just like run through the basics, run a quick one shot, and it's like the first time you guys have ever experienced the game. That I think was my favorite stuff running for Toronto D&D, was just like teaching new players and bringing new people into the fold of D&D. But like for ongoing stuff, it's definitely fun to have a mix. Like I don't mind having new players, but it is nice to keep up like kind of the cadence of the game, to have people that have played at least a little bit before.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think sometimes if you have a table full of new players, sometimes having them, you know, sometimes having them sit there and not know what to do, uh, it can lead to this like awkward silence. So having a player who's like, "Oh, we're gonna walk into town," um, that can be helpful. But I do like DMing for a mix, but I could see the fun in DMing for a table like full of new players. Just watching
Yeah.
that excitement, seeing them learn and kind of get into their characters is really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Watching somebody slaughter their first goblin is something that is always enjoyable.
Yeah, for me, it's watching somebody break into their first RP or character voice, which is character voices are not required. Don't force your players to do those if they're not comfortable doing one or don't have one. Just let it happen naturally. If they choose to have a character voice, then that can really add some fun aspects to the game. But the minute you see this in some D&D podcasts, or you see it in campaign 2 of Critical Role, where I think Sam kind of speaks his first words as not, and everyone just bursts into laughter because it's fun to it's fun to see what people come up with in that regard too. Chris, like what's your favorite aspect of having a new player at the table? Like what is it that, like, for me it's kind of seeing them break into RP or character voice, but
Honestly, for me, it's the fact that I find new players don't seize upon the rules as much, because I always stress that D&D is a game where you can do anything, and that your stats and stuff you're proficient with are kind of a guideline of like the stuff you're really good at, and that you should build actions around, like, suggesting based on party skills what could be done. And that I tended to run one of two adventures for any time I did like the newbie nights for D&D. I don't think I've ever seen either of them go the same way, because I deliberately gave them a extremely open-ended map that was like a kind of a bandit fort with like a double forking river on either side. So there's like four different ways you could go about it. There's a guard tower, and like you could just do it any which way. It always went differently. Some people would immediately trigger an alarm from across the river the instant they left a forest. Other people would like realize they could like take out the camp before the fort. It's the fun of like the different stuff people thought of, and just like the ways they would use their items. They would like, I had people start a forest fire to try and draw some people away and lure them in. I saw people like use illusions to like do game, try and convince an archer to like chase into the bush so he'd eat it for meat. It just like sometimes an experienced player will get a little bit rigid and just like, oh, these are my spells, these are my talents. I will use charisma, I will use greater illusion. But new players have that kind of like that instance. It's like, wait, I can do anything.
yeah.
It's like, well, surely if I just throw enough milk at him, he'll eventually be blind. And it's that real like fun to it, is like having those people who like aren't burdened by the rules of that true, just like the DM will sort it out, just say what you want to do, I'll figure out the checks and say if it's possible.
Yeah.
Bringing that improv yes and to DMing.
That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So like getting started, right? Like you go out and you reach out on these discords, and you reach out in like Toronto D&D Discord or like tabletop discords. And if you Google tabletop Discord group, you'll find quite a few. And I think if you're willing to take the step into DMing, you'll absolutely be able to get a group together. When we talk about getting started, so I'm a DM. I found a mix of players that I think I'm going to get along with and that I think will jive. Where do I go from there?
Well, I guess it'd be what you actually want to run. Which, also this can happen in either order. Either you find the thing you want to run, or you find the players. These ones are kind of interchangeable. But it's, are you going to start a homebrew adventure, a one-shot, a pre-written module? That's the real getting started there.
So I'm gonna go through and ask each of you a question. So, Mike,
Yeah.
new DM, pre-written or homebrew?
Brand new DM that's never DM before.
Brand
I
new
would
DM.
say pre-written.
Chris?
I also, this is also from experience. My first time, I did a series of pre-written one-shots as my first time DMing. I kind of strung them together into a campaign,
Mhm.
which is actually the early birth of my guild system.
Yeah, and I'd be in the same mindset for a brand new DM who's watch some D&D live play or listen to some podcasts and wants to get into it. I'd also probably recommend pre-writtens. The 5e starter set, Lost Minds of Phandelver, great place to start. And the reason for that is that it comes with dice, it comes with little player's handbook, I believe, or like a little kind of guide to DMing, or the module, the written adventure, and it also has like pre-filled character sheets. So in terms of like getting players getting their foot in the door, I kind of feel that's the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Lost Minds is definitely a good place to start. It's that like kind of quintessential thing that everybody I think that's played 5e has played at least once or twice.
Yeah, and I think like the reason I recommend Lost Minds, and I'm just kind of looking it up here. So it's like the starter set is comes with 5 ready to play D&D characters with character sheets. It comes with a rule book. I believe it comes with a bunch of dice as well, and it is about like $25 Canadian. And you can order it on Amazon Prime, and it's like 1 day delivery. So if you're really looking to get started and kind of put your foot to the gas, I think that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, I'd agree. I started from a little bit different side, where the first time I DM'd was on a road trip with my friend Matt, who's in several of our other games. And I'd never done it before, so I just looked online, found a series of highly rated, uh, freely published one-shot adventures, and just printed off a bunch of them, brought them in the car, and gave everyone dice and said, "Let's do this." And I think the biggest thing is that when you first run it, having a preset narrative and the balancing of the encounters for the level you're running at is really useful, because that really takes some time to learn how to do it on your own properly. Like there's calculators and stuff for it.
And let's be real, you
Yeah,
still have trouble balancing encounters.
Oh,
yeah.
it never
I
turns out, because like party difference, like certain spells and stuff, and counterbalancing is never like 100% objective art.
No, it absolutely is never. Those numbers are made up and don't mean anything. If our Wednesday night game means anything at all.
Yeah, I think in terms of, I'm really on the side of pre-writtens. It sounds like you two agree. I think as a new DM, it kind of there's a lot of stuff like Chris said that can be daunting for a new DM. Like how many monsters should I add to this combat, and what are their stats, and things like that. And it can be a lot of work if you're trying to prep that all homebrew. So having a pre-written module like Lost Minds of Phandelver, or something like Wolves of Wheaton, I believe, or Wolves of Welton.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff on DM's Guild that's available for free if you want to go check it out and read through it. Any of the highly rated stuff there is pretty solid.
Wolves of Wheaton is a Star Trek fan fiction I sent you, Scott. We'll talk about that another time.
Yeah, I might have slipped up there.
little Freudian slip there, Scott. That's fine.
Yeah. So
More of a Furrian slip.
okay, so
Yeah.
I decide I want to, as a new DM, I decide I want to do Lost Minds of Phandelver, and I have this group of players. I think the next step is you go to your players and you say, "Hey, I'm thinking of running this Lost Minds of Phandelver. What do you think?" Because if a player doesn't want to be in that setting, if they don't know, they might just be like, "Okay, yeah, that's cool." But let's say you decide to run Curse of Strahd, and a player says, I'm not really into that.
Yeah, or I hate
Actually,
vampires and I'm
that also
terrified.
brings up another good point, Scott, is that when we talk about homebrew versus pre-written, there is a certain like almost like a brand awareness. If you say you're going to run a certain campaign, like a lot of people are aware of Lost Mines Findels being a bigger campaign, similar to Curse of Strahd and the pre-written ones. If you say I'm running this, people, if they haven't played in it, they still kind of they know what to expect.
Mhm.
They're like, oh right, this is going to be like a vampire adventure, or like this is the one with the dragons. And so it does give you that where other players.
Wait, Chris, all D&D modules have dragons, right?
Actually, that's we're gonna when we go to our D&D myth busting things, we're gonna talk about how not all Dungeons and Dragons has dungeons and or dragons in it.
I thought they'd at least have to have one or the other.
I can name 3 that don't.
No, I think that's one thing too is um, if you are going to run Lost Mines of Fandelver, you could take the first chapter of that book and run it as a one shot. If you have people saying, if you go find players saying, "Hey, I'm going to run Lost Mines of Fandelver," they're probably expecting you to be running, multiple sessions, etc. So I think it's important to be clear about, this will be one session or this will be an ongoing session or an ongoing campaign, etc. If you're not sure if you're testing the DM waters, I think going like the one shot direction is also really viable. Just running different one shots for maybe not even the same group.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about filling out and making sure that you find a mix of players that you're going to enjoy spending like a fair amount of time with.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially in longer campaigns, like this is, I mean, in our campaign that we play together, we're together once a week for 3-4 hours. So if people don't get along or there's friction, obviously there's ways to kind of help resolve some of those issues. But if it comes down to a fundamental, like these two people just don't like each other or don't want to spend time together, one
Yeah,
of
it can
them is
definitely
probably
cause
going to
some
end up
problems at the
leaving.
table.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm. Of course, like also like once you can pick something based on what level of DM you are, your comfort level, but that is like how you're going to play it.
Yeah, exactly. Like obviously right now with COVID, we're all meeting online and playing through random tabletop tools. I run on like Roll20 on Wednesdays. Chris, you prefer different tabletops?
Yeah, I've become much more a fan of Astral, and I've also another friend of ours. He runs Fantasy Grounds, which is also a solid tool. We'll probably dedicate some more time to talking about these in greater detail. But this is really just with the overview of uh, probably most people for now looking for online. But eventually, you got to think: do you want to run in person, or maybe you're someone who you're busy and online works better for you? Discord only over voice, just presenting a map with some markers on it in paint. You could do anything.
Yeah, and not even that far. You don't even have to go to that extent. I have played in games where it was, the DM, it was theater of the mind. Which I don't enjoy as much. I do like having a map and being able to move my character around. But I have been in some games where everything was just described to you. And you tell the DM like, "Oh, I'm gonna move up 20 feet. Am I close enough?" And it was just DM discretion, like, "Yeah, you're close enough," or "No, you're not." Just kind of based on what they had in their head, like the battlefield, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like going back to like Critical Role and the people that run that. Like if you've ever seen uh, Matt Mercer run the Red Nose Day special with Stephen Colbert, it was all theater of the mind. Like uh, just it's cooperative storytelling. That when it comes down to it, that's what D&D is.
Yeah, for sure.
And you don't need to have all of the fancy tools and all the fancy source books and all of the like maps. Like new players coming into the game, if their only experience with D&D is watching stuff like Dimension 20 and Critical Role, obviously there's an expectation there of what tools are going to be used and what the experience is like. But there's nothing that says that D&D has to be that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've heard stories of people running their games in a Google spreadsheet, like just having an X represent one character, a Y represent a different one, and having different letters represent different enemies. So like a bunch of O's are orcs, and the capital O is an orc leader. I've
Yeah,
heard people running games like that. There's also, we mentioned Roll20, which I believe is free. We mentioned Astral, which I think has Astral has free options.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, so I think those are kind of two standouts. Um, I believe Fantasy Grounds is paid, but looking into
it
some of
is.
Fantasy Grounds
those,
is paid.
yeah, so looking into some of those options, and having that communicated to your players is important.
Yeah, and
Because
if you're a GM like me who like doesn't have a lot of prep time sometimes, the other cool thing about like things like Roll20 is though they are free and you can upload all your own resources and do all of that stuff yourself, you can also they are partnered with Wizards, so you can buy the source book package through some of these tabletops. Like Roll20 offers uh, the Curse of Strahd package where you get it and it comes with all of the maps, all of the tokens, character sheets created. Most of the tokens, if you don't need to balance it, most of the tokens are already dropped into the maps that you need them to be in. So you have your like combat pre-done and stuff for you. So that can definitely be a useful tool if you don't have a ton of time to prep.
yeah, and some of these options, They do have learning curves, but that goes with any software or any kind of tool you're using.
Even in if you're doing just straight up in person with maps and stuff, it's still just you have a book, you've got to memorize the chapters, have the maps ready, all the tokens and stuff. Everything takes prep at the end of the day.
I think it's a good place to go into like our preferences for online versus in person as a DM. So maybe I'll chime in first here. I prefer running games online, and the reason for that is, number one, I don't have to look at people judging me or my actions or my RP or my character voices. Number two, I like having two monitors. I like having the tabletop on one side, and I like having like DM notes on the other, and not having to shuffle through books or like swipe through an iPad to kind of look at my DM notes. So I do prefer kind of my ideal run D&D setup right now is voice on Discord and then Roll20 as a virtual tabletop, and then my players usually using Beyond 20 or D&D Beyond, sorry, as well as the Beyond 20 add-on for their side of things. But I think as a DM, like online, Discord as a voice option, and like one of those virtual tabletops like Roll20 or Astral is a really good place to start for online D&D. Mike, what's your preference, online or in person?
I prefer running in person, but obviously that isn't the thing we've been able to do for last year. So adapting to online was actually a really cool thing. Like I've been playing D&D, like I said, for most of my life, and I hadn't really ever taken the time to learn how to play online or learn how to run online. So uh, I had learned a lot about D&D Beyond in terms of like player options and homebrewing and creating items and whatnot, but I hadn't looked into any of the functionality around like campaign management and note taking and stuff like that until we went fully online. So I prefer in person, but online definitely has its advantages. Like sitting here with three monitors is definitely a lot easier to have your encounter builder running and have your notes up and have the source book ready if you need to check into something. Like when you guys are running through a castle that has 84 subsections that each have 10 to 15 subsections to them. Um,
Yeah, and your wizard uses a spell that lets you scout all that in an hour, and your DM has to describe every single room.
yeah.
Yeah, I think so. When we mention like VTTs, that stands for virtual tabletop. That's something you might hear us, say a lot. VTTs. Um, as well as D&D Beyond and Beyond 20. So D&D Beyond is popularized by Critical Role, but it's a way for DMs to manage campaigns, encounters. It's a way for players to manage their characters, and it's actually a really, really, really good tool. And Beyond 20 is like a browser extension that kind of helps integrate your D&D Beyond character sheet with
Yeah, Beyond
your
20 is
virtual tabletop.
fantastic.
Yeah.
It essentially lets you, as a DM, you can roll from any character sheet, any monster stat block. You can roll directly into whatever virtual tabletop you're using. I think it works with uh, Roll20, Astral, Foundry. Um, it'll roll for you into those things so that you can kind of manage everything in one place.
Yeah, and if your players, I think as well in terms of players fumbling with character sheets or trying to find stuff, if you do have your players make a character on Beyond 20 on D&D Beyond and install that Beyond 20 add-on, your players can also roll an attack from their character sheet, and that will show up in Roll 20 or in Astral, etc.
Yeah, and it also lets them link out like the spell description. So if you don't memorize every spell in the game, you can have your player just click on the spell that they're casting, so you can see the description and make your ruling if you need to decide how something goes down.
Yeah, and that happens all the time, even with experienced DMs. Like someone might cast a spell and Mike will say, "Can you link it to me?" And on the character sheet, they'll just click display in VTT, and it'll just put the whole spell description there for you as a DM, and you can read it, and that can be useful. Chris, what's your preference? Online, in person?
I'm definitely also more of an in-person kind of DM. I think that it was kind of convenient that I was looking into moving to. I used to be a very like physical map based person with like 3D props and stuff on it, but I was looking to moving into projection based screen mapping stuff. So it kind of helped me transition online. I personally find it a lot more work to run online because there's like more stuff to do. You got to deal with map layers. Tokens aren't just like the minis I already have. Um, I don't mind. Like, it's fine. I definitely prefer running in person though. Something about it, like I like seeing characters express the expressions that people make when they do characters and stuff like that. You can read the room a lot easier. That's the part that I really enjoy, is that for like the role play segments, I feel like actually having like a table and the players in front of you makes it a little bit easier, a little bit more fun, and I can react faster. Having like, I've got a bunch of like random map tiles, pre-made maps and stuff I can throw at a moment's notice, as opposed to having to prep an online map and get like the shadows done, the wall lines, things like that. But I mean, that's all stuff we'll go into a little bit more. We're going to have definitely a talk about the details of different VTTs that you can use.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
sure. So I that section was maybe a little daunting for a new DM. So let's boil it back down. At bare minimum, I think if you're playing online, some way to communicate with audio, Discord being like a prime example, and a VTT, um, Astral and Roll20 being, prime choices in that kind of arena, and that's it, bare minimum.
Bare minimum, that would be it. I mean, you need some way to manage your characters as well, so definitely recommend D&D Beyond. It is free as both a DM and as a player, uh, as long as you don't want to like share content and whatnot. I think you can create up to 6 characters for free. I'm not sure what that number is anymore because I've had a subscription
It
since
is
the
indeed
site launched.
6.
Is it 6? Okay, I don't know. I have like 75 characters created on this website, so not quite sure what that original limit was.
Yeah, it is 6 because when I get up to 5 plus, Mike, and I need to make a new character, I need to decide which of my characters I'm going to delete into the ether. So yeah, it is
Yeah,
6.
see, I couldn't make that decision, so I just paid for the subscription, so I didn't have to kill my character.
Okay, so you have this setting, you've agreed on it, you've agreed on the mode of play, so everyone's going to meet in person, or everyone's going to meet online. Let's move to the next thing, scheduling.
Yeah, scheduling is always the nightmare with D&D as an adult. Trying to schedule anything as an adult is always super difficult. Personally, I have always just found like when looking for players, I find a time that's available for me as a DM, and I'm like, these days at this time, who can make it? And like that's one of the major determining factors into getting the players ready for it.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think having that expectation, for some people, having that expectation or committing to, like, for example, our games are every Wednesday at 7:30, and people have agreed to, be there. And there are still times um, where people can't make it for whatever reason, and it's understandable. But I think having just a general agreement of this day and this time, are you playing weekly? Are you playing every other week? Are you playing monthly? I think it's important to kind of have some expectation set. But I find this is why I really enjoyed Chris's drop-in campaign too. And as a DM, if you're running one shots, you don't necessarily have to worry like, oh, are my players going to show up every week? Because you run a one shot and some players show up and you run the game, and that's it. You schedule another one shot with maybe another group. But if you are looking for a long running campaign, or you and your friends have decided to kind of play a campaign, then agreeing on how often and what day and time is
For
important
sure.
for sure.
And I think there's also the aspect of like for Chris's game on Thursdays, for example, we have backups for people. So if like one person can't make it, somebody else can play their character. So like you can learn multiple characters, and that can be a way to continue on if you don't want to not play if a certain number of people can't make it.
Yeah, and another thing, I don't think as a new DM, like, oh, what happens if one person can't make it? It's not the end of the world. You can kind of have a story for why. So, for example, oh, they were extremely exhausted the night before, and they didn't wake up this morning, and you try to wake them up, but they couldn't, and the medicine man from the village is checking on them. You
Yeah,
can kind of run that into the story. You could just not mention the character the whole episode. You could have one of your other players, and this happens often, run their character. So I know in our Wednesday game, one of our players hasn't been able to make it for personal reasons, and one of our other players is just running. running weird in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a fan of running kind of like the chaotic schedule thing where when I first started the Black Shrike campaign in its first in its non like long form campaign form, it was because I worked at a bar, I ran events, my schedule was very unreliable, but I knew I really wanted to do D&D. So I thought, well, what's a system that would have players like, drop it out? It's like, well, it's a guild, and every session is a mission that will start at the guild hall, end at it. So it's like, hey, whoever's here, go do this thing. And I made kind of like a log that would keep track of stuff. So like, even if you weren't there, like, oh, so that's what they did last time, and contribute to a bigger story. And that's the thing I really took forward with me into D&D is that even the campaign I'm running now on Thursday, like it's this adventure themed campaign where you're in a jungle and stuff, but they have a system of like uh, people who are at their base camp in a party, which allows me that, let's say I'm missing several players. I normally would have, I think, up to 5. If I'm under 3, well, I can just ask someone else I know. They'll hop in for an episode and just be a wandering adventure. Like Scott stepped in for one of those. Another friend of mine, Liam, stepped in for one, and they just are one-off characters who Scott's been on twice as 2 different people. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a fun thing because it really adds to like the atmosphere of just like, oh man, this really is like a big collective that's just wandering through a giant jungle, and like people come, people go.
Yeah, and I think part of that was like I really enjoy like theory crafting and playing different characters and just trying out as a player, trying out different things. So as a DM, like when Chris asked me as a DM, like, hey, can you fill in like sometimes Chris asked me 3 hours before the session, hey, can you fill in here? Um yeah, absolutely. And I would roll up a character. And some of my like I've had really fun moments with some of those characters. And I know Mike, like, how'd you feel about my characters popping in there?
Yeah, they're fantastic. Like it's always fun to have new people introduced, and the way that Chris does that, like having people essentially guest star if you're short, that's a really good way if you can on short notice get a friend or something to fill in with a character. It's a really good way to add exposition to a campaign as well.
Yeah, and I will say, like, for a new GM who might not have like a series of experienced players who they know they could just ask, hey, you busy? Can you just play? Um, I would say also just kind of like having slightly more characters than you need to run a session
Yeah,
is also another thing to do. Is like I would say 5 or 6 is probably a good number to start with because then like you're probably going to get at least 4 on a given day.
yeah, and you're probably never going to actually get 6.
Yeah, and that's enough to get off a decent amount of session with.
So I'm gonna go the other way here. I'm gonna go the way of I think DMing for 6 people as a new DM can be very daunting, and even trying to find 6 people that are like if you find 6 friends, I think maybe that's easier. But let's say you find 6 people online, the chances that those people are all going to get along is probably lower because there's more, right? So
Actually, yeah, I'd agree with you there, Scott.
yeah,
That is six friends, 4
yeah.
strangers.
So for me, like my ideal party size is like around 4 players, and if one of those players can't make it, like, okay, this player, whatever, they trip and they kind of mess up their ankle, and their character cannot help you in combat. They've kind of been sidelined a little bit, and if you really feel that your encounter's balanced for an extra character there, one thing you could do is I think with new players having them run an extra character might be overwhelming. So one
Mhm.
thing you could do is just as a DM, give them a sidekick.
Or if you have it prepared, instead of sidekick, you just sidebar it. Just be like, something delays the other party members, and if you have anything prepared, just do like something that can be run for that number of players. Just do a 2-player buddy cop mystery for,
which
a day or
which we've
so.
done. We've Chris has run a game for me and another person because 2 other people or 3 other people couldn't show up, and we did it.
Yeah, I just put the campaign on hold. And I was just like, you know what? Today is like everyone's busy doing their own stuff now, but some people came and like they got this mystery that's just like it was a more role play intensive mission, so they could kind of really like get their chew on their characters a little bit, and it was a fun little thing built for 2 players.
Or alternatively, something Chris has also done is just let your party walk into something that they're in no way prepared for. And then
I only do that with very experienced players. I will point that out.
because people need to learn that sometimes it's okay to run.
So let's throw some ideas for a new DM, and like one of my players doesn't show up, right? Like I'll throw an idea out there. One of the players doesn't show up, and somebody in the town, all their chickens are let loose, and your whole episode could be trying to recover these chickens, and that's more of an RP episode, and maybe there's not combat in there, but like an episode like that can be really memorable for players, and just really funny. Like there's chickens running around the town, and they have to talk to people and try and like do nature checks to find these chickens, like and throw in a little bit of shopping in there. Oh, a traveling merchant comes into town, and something like that can still feel fulfilling to players,
Yeah,
and
I
not
would agree with that.
not be so like tied to I need this many players because my encounter.
Taking the opportunity of like having less players to do like some more role play heavy scenarios can be really rewarding for the people who did show up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the funny thing about that, right, and this has happened in our campaigns too, is that you have 3 players show up and they're chasing these chickens, and then in the next session, the players come back who are away, and you have these 3 players at the table talking about chickens and finding the chickens, and oh, we know the chicken master now, and the chicken master has given us, loot.
Yeah, or you have this +1 sort of chicken finding that
Which I do
Scott
have on one of my
legitimately
characters.
has on one of his characters.
I don't even remember how I got that thing, but but I think an episode like that could be really funny because when the other players come back and you have the table talking about these chickens, the other players are like, "What the hell did I miss?" And that can be kind of fun.
That's kind of the reason why you have to have a bunch of different characters at the table, and you want to kind of go a little bit over what you want, or maybe under what you want, depending on like your experience as a DM. Like a more experienced DM with players who he knows have like active lives would go over his players.
Yeah.
While a new DM with like maybe the less familiar, you want to kind of like stick to closer to what you ideally want and be prepared to run under the expected players.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
for me, like my ideal party size is 3 to 4. I don't know how you guys run campaigns with 6 players. Sometimes people, especially online, people can tend to talk over each other at times. It's hard without the visual cues, but my ideal party size, like 3 to 4 players, is kind of my sweet spot.
Yeah, I'm probably like 3 to 5, but
Yeah.
I can deal with more or less.
I'm around the same. I have a problem saying no to people, so I've had like up to 7 players on my table in some of my campaigns.
Yeah.
Because I just don't like people turning people away. I just like
Okay, so
rebalancing things.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so I mean, like you've picked a day, you know when you're gonna meet, you have all your players. Let's talk about like session 0 and just touch on it because I think that's kind of our next topic or our next episode is like, you know, what is session 0? What do players need to bring, and like character creation, right? Like at this
Yeah, so
point,
it's like before the session 0 essentially is like it's who you have the campaign, you have the players. How are they going to make those characters, and what are they going to come into it expecting? What's their backstory, things like that.
Yeah,
yeah.
what level are you starting at?
So I think in terms of that, like, so character creation is probably something you want to discuss, like going into session 0.
Oh yeah, that's pre-session 0. Is how does it get started?
Yeah. So Chris, what are the different like? You have your session, you have your scheduled time, you've agreed on the mode of play, and you have your players. Let's talk about as a DM what you need to instruct your players to do in terms of character creation. So we talked about level and maybe like what are the different types of character creation?
Yeah. So I mean, levels are a very subjective thing that's based on the campaign you're running, the experience, whatever.
Yeah.
That's something you'll figure out when you're
So-
doing your setting. Same with allowed races and stuff like that.
So I'm gonna say as a new DM, like I'm just gonna put this out there as a new DM, start at level 1, especially with new players. If you start them at level like 2 or 3, there's some additional things on there that might be overwhelming to a new player. So if you start them at level 1, they kind of get to know their character a little bit. They can only do some basic things like cast a spell or attack, and as they level, they start to learn a little bit more and more of their characters, or the characters can do more and more. But I'd say just as a new DM, just start at level 1.
Yeah, I'd agree. As a new DM with new players, you definitely want to start at level 1. but you don't want to like leave them there forever. So definitely, like I would say, after not your session 0, but after your session 1, you want to have that like first major session culminate in something that is going to get your players a level, so they can start unlocking some of the capabilities of their character with their
I agree.
kind of completion of that first
I
campaign.
feel like kind of like you got those big spikes. It's like obviously depending on your experience, it's kind of like there's level 1, level 3, so you get the subclasses. I think 5 is most people's first feat. And then usually I tend to jump to 11 after that to
Yeah.
get to the fun stuff.
I think I ran one that was like level 11 or level 12 as a starting point. But I think as a new DM and new players, like start your characters at level 1. Just say, you know, you guys are level 1. That's how you'll be starting. And in terms of that, like when we talk about session 0, session 0 is more of like a planning session. A lot of times in session 0, there is no actual play. You might introduce some things, but you know you actually don't play D&D during session 0. It's more of a prep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that's an important thing. But like also this like before everyone starts it, regardless at any level, there's also when they first make their characters is how are they going to bring them into the session. And you decide like what races are allowed and what classes, subclasses, anything like that, and of course the all important the stats. How do you tell your players how to roll your stats?
I love rolling. Standard array is boring to me. It seems like the coward's way out. You never have somebody with 4 int if they take standard array. So I love the randomness of rolled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about. Can you talk a little bit about, since you're a fan of that method? Can you talk a little bit of how a rolled character would get their stats? And I know on D&D Beyond, if you're creating a character there, they actually do allow you to roll there. But could you talk to that method?
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, for each of the stats that you have for your character, you would roll 4d6 and drop the lowest of those d6s, and then write down that number. Roll basically 6 sets of 4d6, drop the lowest of each one, and then you assign those based on your class and subclass.
I mean, every time I have a game, I tend to just allow all of these because I find sometimes, especially new players, they don't really know what to do. So giving them standard array as an option just kind of lets them be like, okay, like there's like some highs, some lows, they're really high, it's fine. And also, when I don't know people, I always ask that I see the roles in some way, whether they be by a bot role or something like that. Um, just on
Yeah, for
like
sure.
this
You
is the
don't want a
thing. Like, there's
superhero
some
at
level of
level 1.
trust. At the same time, like even though there's a million ways around like doing that, like if someone shows up and they have like an 18 in every stat, I'm like, really, really, I'm just gonna make it harder. But yeah, like I said, like if I didn't see it and I do that, as it's like, well, okay, congratulations, your high stats. Guess what? Everything's harder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And part by the same thing, like at the end of the day, uh, rolling is for players who just want they want to toss the dice and stuff like that. Everything else is just if people just want to, quick build, get into it. I don't hold it against anyone for using any ones, which is why I allow all three because point by a standard array, they're the standard, they're fine.
I think
Yeah, that's fair.
as a new DM, I think it might be helpful to actually pick one of these methods. Like either have everyone roll in front of you, or have everyone use standard array, etc. Um, Especially if you have new players. Like I think so. I'll talk a little bit about standard array. Standard array is that you have the following numbers: 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. So instead of rolling for your stats, those are the numbers that you get. And players can allocate those to any stat. So for example, you could put the 15 in strength, you could put the 8 in intelligence, etc. And I like that because sometimes when people roll, like they end up being good at everything,
Or bad
um,
at everything.
or bad at everything. And I think that can be fun with more experienced players. But with new players, having them be good at everything, I think sometimes they might want to kind of do every check.
Yeah, and it
Or
also depends on the mix too, right? Like if you have all new players and they all roll, and one person rolls all eights, one person rolls like two 18s, it's going to feel bad and unbalanced at the table for those
That
new
is true.
players.
Then it does feel unfair. Whenever I have to use pre-mades for new players because they just don't know character creation and just we haven't done that. I just want to get them into a game. I always use standard array for the characters they're playing.
Yeah.
Just to the best of whatever class they want to play is, and just make their characters for them with that, because it's the easiest. It makes sense. It's like, this is your good stat, this is your second best stat, and down the line to the thing you're bad at, and it creates a really easy to read dichotomy of just like, you're good at like this thing and like a couple of these other things, and this is the thing, maybe ask someone else in the party to handle.
Yeah. And I don't think stats are, so you're talking about, how when a player is making a character, like, this is your primary stat, this is your secondary. As a new DM guiding your players to this stuff, you might not know, right? Like, you might not know that a rogue is dex based. So if you are a new DM, like, and you're using standard array, let your players do whatever with those numbers. Put them wherever they want. And then later on, if they come to you and say, hey, I just realized that, my attacks are all based on dex. Can I switch some of my stats around? Maybe allow that in the first few sessions.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like, if you're at a point where you're just kind of making them for people and maybe you made a mistake, always allow them to switch them.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean more so like, if you tell your players like you're using standard array, and
and they don't
they
realize how
don't
their
know it,
character
so your
works.
rogue goes
Yeah,
off,
that's true as well.
and your rogue throws a 15 in strength because he wants to be strong.
Or more likely that your rogue would throw a bunch in charisma because they thought that, maybe they do a ton of like deception.
Yeah.
And they realize that like, oh man, like I want to go assassin later on.
Yeah.
I want to go more damage.
So I think within the first few sessions, kind of letting them change those stats around, especially for new players, is a good thing. I think if they want to do that later into the campaign, it's generally frowned upon, but that's something that as a DM you can work with your players.
It's something as a DM like I allow sometimes if it makes sense for the character. Like if somebody is going to be like taking a dip into another class to multi-class, or they're going to be like going through some huge character change, or like if their character died and got resurrected, and they decide to have a change of heart and like take a level in cleric or something, then like I will let stats change later in the game based on that.
Yeah, so I think like starting off with rolled or standard array, they're both good choices. I feel like maybe for more experienced players, rolling's kind of where it's at. For newer players and newer DMs, maybe standard array is kind of a more straightforward approach.
Yeah, or part buy, because it's as easy, especially if you have D&D Beyond.
Yeah, I feel like point buy is, like, if you ask me to explain point buy,
if you have an automated point buy system, it's easy.
Yeah.
If you don't, then no, the standard's easier.
For sure. If you ask me to explain point buy to you, I couldn't. But there are a lot of.
Oh, me neither.
There are a lot.
That's why you need the automated system.
If you have D&D Beyond, then point buy is incredibly easy and makes sense. Otherwise,
if you don't, it's arcane and doesn't make sense at all. Yeah.
So you've decided on kind of your character stats, etc., and that should be kind of communicated to your player. How to roll up their stats, or if you're using standard array, communicate that, and then we should communicate to players like what to bring to this session 0. So yeah, Mike, Chris, what should players bring to session 0?
Well, I'd say that once you have that, like, they'll have a basic idea of the setting. Like, is it going to be one of the classic D&D settings, the homebrew one? They'll have a loose idea of, what the plot, the terrain is, something like that. So, they're setting, and then they should just come with their basic character concept. They may not be 100% on their backstory, even their name and stuff like that, but they're like, you know what? I'm going to play a paladin at level 3, because that's what we talked about. And you mentioned, like, let's say it's Curse of Straw. It's like, it's undead. I feel like a paladin belongs there, or they have something like that. Maybe not everything's nailed down, and they're going to work it out in session 0, but they should have a general idea of their stats, their class, and like what kind of the loose character archetype they're going to play is.
Yeah, absolutely, because that's what session 0 is really for when it comes down to it. We'll get into more detail about that in the next episode, which will be all about session 0. But yeah, characters just need to come with a loose concept and idea, and then you work that out at the table with everybody to make sure there's not 5 clerics.
Yeah, and but I'd add one thing to that, right? And that one thing being, they can have their character concept, but maybe having an idea of not just one class they want to play, but maybe other options as well. Because if you do go to session 0 and everyone's playing clerics, someone might want to switch out. So having a few ideas, having your players have a few ideas of, a class and maybe a backup class if that class doesn't work out.
Yeah, for sure. It's always good to have options. And that's something you can work out either at session 0 or beforehand. If you want to message back and forth with your players and just see what their concepts are before they get to a session 0.
Yeah, that is also a really good thing, is having an ongoing discussion before session 0 where people can kind of like, spitball their classes to the whole group. So it's not like a surprise in session 1. If you have that option, if it's, a group of friends, stuff like that, it's like, hey, like we're getting together, everyone post what you're thinking, and they can, work with each other pre-session 0 to kind of choose a loose direction of it. Outside of your stuff, they can figure it out themselves. Anyway, so that's the sort of stuff you want to do before you even start your adventure. And so next time we're going to talk about session 0, which is what your players do before you start the adventure, which is really just bringing together everything you've been working on so far with the characters, the setting, the story, everything before you start your campaign.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So just join us next time for session 2, where we talk about all things session 0. We'll go through establishing boundaries, your actual character creation, backstory, and bonds, if that's something you feel like you want to do in your game, your adventure hook, player introduction, and those are all the things that we will kind of run through in detail next time. I'm Mike, and again, if you need to slide into a DM's DM us on Insta, Twitter, Facebook at DMs Discuss, or hit us on email at dmsdiscuss@gmail.com.
I'm Chris, and you don't need a Sentinel feed to catch our new episodes. Hit the subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher app.
And I'm Scott. Hope you enjoyed the episode. And as always, check the show notes for links and other fun stuff. We'll catch you after a long rest.